Hello and welcome if you just joined us. Thank you for tuning in. You don't have to stay with us the whole time, but please do if you can. And we're going to be having a discussion specifically about mathematics professional development. So I'm Lucy Rycroft-Smith from Cambridge Mathematics, and this is Lynne McClure, also from Cambridge Mathematics, in fact she's the director. And we're going to be having a discussion based on some of the thoughts that we've been having, but also some input from people who have asked us questions. And if you want to join in live and ask us some questions, we'd love to have you. Please use the hashtag CamEdLive, which is also up there, and we should get your questions and comments as they come in. So I'm just going to start by introducing Lynne and saying a little bit about her career so far, which has been pretty amazing. So Lynne, at the moment, is the director of Cambridge Mathematics and has also headed up the Enrich project, which you might know and love, and as an ex-maths teacher, I definitely do. She is also at the moment sitting on ACME, which is the Advisory Committee for Mathematics Education. And you also might not know that she headed up the Underground Maths project, which again is absolutely beloved of maths teachers. So Lynne, I wonder if you want to just tell us a little bit about your career to date and some of the highlights in terms of professional development for you.
Well, where to start? I always wanted to be a maths teacher, and so I started being a secondary maths teacher, and then I decided that actually I knew a lot about mathematics, but I didn't really know very much about teaching children, and so I retrained to be a primary teacher. And I suppose that although my love of maths spans the whole gamut from early years all the way up to university, I suppose, my heart actually is really in primary mathematics.
Yeah.
And I think probably, especially in professional development for primary maths teachers. I became a tutor and then subsequently a lecturer at Oxford Brookes University when it was Westminster College. Westminster College actually really trained a lot of teachers, and it was called teacher training then, not teacher development or teacher education or anything else. And those were in the good old days when if you were going to be a primary teacher, you could do a PGCE, but actually if you really wanted to be a primary teacher, you did a 3 or a 4-year BEd, which was really nice, and you could really get to grips with the subjects. From doing that, I became the director of a project which is called RECAP, which is a research centre for able pupils. And I did that for a while before I moved up to Scotland. Moving up to Scotland was very interesting. We did it because my husband had a new job up there, and so I gave up what I was doing down south, and I decided that I would use this as an opportunity to set up on my own. So I had my own business, but at the same time I was a lecturer at Edinburgh University at Murray House, and if there's anybody watching from Scotland, they will know that Murray House is one of the premier, I suppose, teacher training institutions in Edinburgh.
Can I just pause you just for a second then? Did you notice any noticeable difference in moving from England to Scotland in terms of teacher training?
Yes, absolutely. One of the things about Scotland is that you can't teach mathematics, certainly at secondary school, unless you have got a mathematics qualification, or at least a degree which has a large amount of mathematics in it.
Okay.
And it's interesting because at the moment Scotland is also having a problem with recruiting maths teachers, but they have still stuck to the fact that they want to have people who've got a degree which is really, really pivotal for mathematics. And I think when you look at the worry that we have at the moment with teacher training, we have a lot of people teaching secondary mathematics who may not have a large amount of mathematics in their degree. So they have to be really very committed in order to be able to learn the mathematics really that they have to teach.
Yeah, so it's like doing double time really. You're actually learning on the job and learning extra stuff as you go.
Absolutely.
Which is extra workload.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's hard enough being a beginning teacher, I think, without having to do all of that one.
Yeah.
Anyway, Scotland was fantastic. I loved being in Scotland, and I combined working in Murray House with doing lots and lots of professional development. Originally, or initially rather, it was down south, as they call it, because nobody knew who I was in Scotland. So nobody particularly wanted me then. But gradually I got to know the Scottish system, which is very different. Teachers have an allowance for professional development in Scotland.
Is that a monetary or time allowance?
It's a time allowance, and that can be within school time, but they are expected to do a certain amount of professional development on their own each year.
And do they have to evidence that in some way?
And they have to evidence it. Yes, they absolutely have to evidence it. Also, there is a great, I would say, I mean, it's 8 years now since I left Scotland, but I would say certainly then there was a greater sense of professionalism, not because the teachers weren't professional, but because of the way in which they were treated. So teaching, I think, certainly then was seen as a profession to be respected. And that doesn't always happen down here. Anyway,
what do you think contributes to that sense of, I guess, outsiders viewing the profession as autonomous and trusted and high status? How does that come about, do you think?
I think one thing that was pivotal was the new curriculum for excellence that was designed. Has its good aspects and its not so good aspects, but one of the things in its design was that teachers were very much taken into the fold, really, and their attitudes and their thoughts and their ideas and their comments were very much taken into account. And if you contrast that with the way curricula are designed down here, you know, teachers are the recipients of it. They're not really very active in its design. So, so I think if the policymakers are giving the message that they think that what teachers think matters, then I think that sense of respect permeates other things.
And speaking of curriculum design, you were quite involved in the last national curriculum, weren't you?
I was. I chaired the groups that I always say attempted to advise ministers on the primary and secondary curriculum. It was a very interesting process. Slightly scarring, I would say,
Really?
because of the at that time, international comparisons, well, they still continue to be something which is very, very important. But I don't think it's always wise to shoehorn things that have been successful in other countries in unless you have taken into account the context and the background of the teachers as well as everything else. So yeah, so Scotland was very interesting, and I learned a huge amount. But then I came down to Cambridge, and to what I saw as the best job in the world, which was being the director of Enrich. I think Enrich has a really, you know, lots of people have a soft spot for Enrich, which is an amazing project considering it's been going for over 20 years now. It's not many maths education projects have been going for 20 years, and the number of people using it both in the UK and internationally has, you know, rocketed.
Millions,
I don't know what the number of hits a month is now, but it's certainly in the millions. And internationally, you know, it's not only UK, and it's not only English-speaking countries, it's all over the world. So I came down and I did that for a while, and I absolutely loved it. That gave me an opportunity also to travel and to do a lot of professional development there as well. And then the job of Director of Cambridge Maths came up. And I thought, well, Enrich is pretty good, but there may be one thing that might even beat it.
Wow.
And here we are in Cambridge Maths.
Do you want to say a little bit about what Cambridge Maths is? Because we may not have an audience of people who are completely familiar with it.
Cambridge Maths is a really, really interesting project because although we live here in Cambridge Assessment, we're not a Cambridge Assessment project. We're actually a project that brings together the maths faculty, the education faculty, Cambridge University Press and Cambridge Assessment in supporting a project which is looking at maths education. And what we're looking at is a tool. We're designing a tool. It's going to be, well, it already is, a digital tool. So it's using all of the affordances of digital technology to design a tool from which we can produce lots of different curricula for different purposes. And the tool that we're designing is, wherever it's possible, we're basing what we do on research and on evidence. And that's really important for credibility not only in the UK but also internationally, because this is not for the UK, not only for the UK. It would be nice if it was for the UK, if we had a way of influencing things in the UK, but it is certainly for an international community. So that's really important. And the idea is, once we've written this tool, which we're 3 out of 5 years through doing, so we have something substantial already, we will be able to have professional development that links to it, and assessments and resources and tasks, lots of which of course already exist, so we're not going to be writing all of those from scratch, but connecting them all up. And the USP of Cambridge Maths is that we believe that mathematics is a connected set of ideas, and we don't believe that in many curricula you get the impression that there are connections to be made. And we know that students don't recognise that bits of mathematics are connected with each other. We also are embedding digital technology where we think that that is appropriate, not necessarily all the time, but where it's appropriate. And we're being really as collaborative as we can. And it's amazing that we've had so many people who've been prepared to work with us, both here and
that's really noticeable for me working on this project, coming from being a maths teacher to working on a project where I'm able to collaborate in such a wide international network of people. And that's partly you, isn't it? Because you picked up all of those friends and collaborators and acquaintances along your travels.
Yes, I think that I think maths educators are very willing to share their expertise. And one of the associations, ISDDE, which is the International Society for the Design and Development of Education, for those of you who don't know, which is an international group of the most amazing designers in curriculum and PD and assessment and tasks. And it always amazes me when we go to those conferences how willing people are who are very, very knowledgeable to share their expertise with people who are beginners, really. I think it's amazing.
And you've been chair of ISDDE, haven't you?
I have, and I finished being chair in December, and I've really enjoyed it. It's been a real privilege.
Wonderful, excellent. So did you want to say anything about underground maths?
Underground maths. So underground maths was a project that was funded by the DFE, and we accomplished a huge amount. Both Enrich and underground maths ostensibly started off as being collections of tasks that would be useful for teachers. But for both of them, there is quite a different, I suppose, ethos to them, in that they require teachers to be really active in their own understanding of the mathematics. Whereas some resources you just pick up and use, but with Enrich and underground maths, you really have to understand the resources before you can use them in the way in which they were designed. And so they both have turned out to be hugely based on professional development. So whereas underground maths was originally just writing materials for A-level maths, it actually ended up being a big professional development project too. And underground maths had lots in common with Cambridge Maths, because underground maths, well, as you know, but maybe those people who are watching didn't know, it was based on an underground map. And the idea was that you had trains and sequences of activities that all connected with each other, and the underground lines also connected with each other. And that was, in many respects, that has fed into what we're doing in Cambridge Maths. And
we have actually got the expertise of one of the team members as well, which helps.
We have Tabitha, yes. Sadly, underground maths now it's not an active team, but for anybody who's interested, if you Google underground maths, all of those resources are still available free, because it was a DFE funded project on the underground maths website.
So the way that you describe the Enrich resources and the professional development resources from underground maths sounds like it's hard work for the teachers. It sounds like, as you say, they can't just pick it up and use it. So what would be the incentive for that teacher to actually use those sorts of resources rather than something which ostensibly is much easier to use? How might you explore the possibilities there?
I think you're absolutely right that one of the things about Enrich and underground maths was winning hearts and minds of teachers. Because both of them, or we call them rich tasks, both of them had these rich tasks which actually do require some input from teachers before you can then teach them, as I say, in the way in which they've been designed. But the interesting thing is that quite often teachers would look at them and say, oh, my students wouldn't be able to do this. And I don't have time to do these things. This is going to be a lot of time, A, for me to prepare, and secondly, I've got so much of the curriculum to get through that I'm not sure that I've got time to do these rich tasks. Yeah. But actually, if you can persuade teachers to find just a little bit of space to have a go at them, then usually they will come back and say, gosh, that's so different to the way I thought it was going to be. And the students reacted in such a positive way that actually I'm going to try and use more of these. And then, the benefits begin to show themselves. So I suppose the sort of teachers who would gravitate both to enrich and to underground maths in the first place would be the people who themselves are probably reflective practitioners, people who want to improve their own understanding and want their students to become, real mathematicians, think like mathematicians. But a lot of the PD was about trying to hook teachers in to have a go. And once they'd had a go, usually they were prepared to do more. Not all the time. We have one or two who resolutely didn't. But
what they expended perhaps in time and effort, they actually got back several times over in inspiration, enthusiasm, and as you say, looking at things differently, having a bit of space to think about their own identity as mathematicians.
And they said that the students and the children really enjoyed it, and it wasn't necessarily what they would have predicted.
Well, that's interesting. So talking about identity, I wanted to ask you about that. And the idea really that a mathematician is a very solid, very protected identity is an interesting thing in our business, as you know. And often when we move between identities, so perhaps you thought of yourself in the past as a teacher, maybe a researcher, maybe a teacher, educator, a mathematician, that can feel difficult or uncomfortable to sort of code switch between those. How do you see yourself, and how do you think that affects your view of math teachers?
I mean, in the elevated position of being the director of Cambridge Mathematics, I have to say that I don't really think that my vision of myself, my identity, has changed much. So I think if you cut a slice of me, I think you'd say teacher all the way through.
Like a piece of rock.
Yeah. I love teaching. I absolutely love teaching. I can remember, the first few weeks, months and years of being a teacher are quite hard work, but I always used to think I get paid for doing this as well. This is amazing. I have to say it's a long time ago, and things have changed. I'm not sure I would feel the same about that now. So even when I was teacher educator, I still felt that I was a teacher. But by a teacher, I don't mean telling people what to do. I mean facilitating people's learning. So I think not the sage on the stage, but the guide on the side. I think that was what I always saw myself as being, really. And then I think the research bit, the more you know, the more you realise you don't know.
Oh yeah, so Dunning-Kruger.
Absolutely. And I mean, I did a 1-year PGCE. I had not done a maths degree. I'd done a psychology degree. So for me, I was having to learn a huge amount during my PGCE. And I think most of it was about the skills of classroom management. There wasn't very much about, and being sure that you knew the mathematics. There wasn't an awful lot about pedagogy. And I then didn't realise that there was this, I mean, I don't know why I didn't realise it, but I didn't. There was this enormous resource of research that you could draw on and read about, written by people whom I'd never even heard of then, and now, I sort of sit at their feet and hear some of them, my friends, luckily. But also, you sort of really respect all of the work that they did, and you think, why didn't I know about this before? So yeah, I see myself as a teacher, but I also see myself as a researcher, because I don't think that you can be a really effective teacher unless you're prepared to do some research, whether that is finding out about research formally or whether it's doing your own action research.
Yes.
But you need to be moving on.
Yeah. Well, I'm just going to pause for a minute because we have got some wonderful viewers tuning in from all over the world.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so Sudan, India, Argentina and Jordan to say hello to.
Wow.
So thank you very much for joining us.
Hello.
And
Welcome.
please do send us your comments and questions.
Yes.
Use the hashtag and we would love to hear from you. And we also have Sussex, Wiltshire and Kent. So hello. I hope you're enjoying pizza if you have some. So something you said there, Lynne, about identity, you sort of evaded the question of, are you a mathematician? I'm going to prod slightly.
I'm definitely a mathematician. I think we're all mathematicians.
Wonderful.
And I don't see a mathematician as necessarily being somebody who has a degree or a PhD or whatever.
Yeah.
I see a mathematician as somebody who's prepared to have a go at thinking mathematically.
Yeah.
And I think we can always get better. I can always become a better mathematician. But yeah, I'm definitely a mathematician.
Good.
I also look at the world through a mathematician's eyes, I think. I'm always looking for symmetry or pattern or, you know, those sorts of things. And I often think what it must be like not to be like that. It's quite odd, I
never know. Yeah, okay, so we were talking about research then, and we were talking about the place for teachers keeping up with research and using research to make their own evidence-informed decisions. Yeah. And I wondered if you wanted to say something about professional development in that vein, because we know it's very difficult for teachers to connect with research for all sorts of reasons. And something that Cambridge Maths is doing is starting to do some small work in that area.
Yeah.
And so what's really the place of evidence and research in professional development, specifically for maths teachers, and how can that be better supported?
See, the problem is educational research has a really bad name.
I see. How so?
If you look at lots and lots of papers that are written on educational research, they're all very interesting. Some of them are philosophical, so they give you a different way of looking at things. Some of them describe something that happened in the classroom, or there might be a very large-scale study. But they quite often miss the point about saying, so what? So what is the point of doing all of this research? How does that actually impact on people's classroom practice? So for teachers to spend their time either listening to or reading research, it's jolly well better be useful to them. Or at least earn its place. You know, I mean, it might be philosophically an interesting thing to do, but I think most teachers want to become better teachers.
Of course.
And that's why they read this stuff, because they hope that it's going to give them some extra insight, or it's going to give them some really firm basis on which they can change their practice.
Yes.
So if you look at a lot of research digests, they just give you a summary, whereas what I think the Chartered College of Teachers is doing with Impact and what we're doing with our espressos is trying to say, look, this is some of the research that is really interesting. It's not all totally new, because quite a lot of it is stuff that's been around for quite a long time.
With good reason.
With good reason. But this is really interesting stuff, and this has implications for the way that you teach mathematics. So for those of you who are watching who don't know, if you go onto the Cambridge Maths website, you can see, I think 12, or is it 13 now? Nearly 13 espressos.
Yeah.
And espressos are 2 pages of summary about a particular research question. We've looked at the most relevant research.
Some examples, I think.
Yes. I'll show one up.
Yeah.
Let's have a look. I don't know whether that. There's a little bit of lag on what I'm seeing. So what I'm seeing is me a couple of minutes ago. Yes. So these are on the Cambridge Maths website. They're 2 pages, and they have a whole selection of different articles and bits of research that are summarised. We've got a research question, an infographic, which is here, which tells you, it's a quick way into the research really, and then paragraphs, each of which have some implications at the bottom. And the thing that those people, especially who are doing master's degrees and want to have something to cling on to with their research references, is at the bottom there are a whole load of references, and those are all, if you're online, those are all hyperlinked. I think that's a really important thing, because teachers don't really have the time to go around all of these things. And we've got a few lined up, but one of the things that we would I suppose encourage teachers to do is, if you have particular research questions that you would like answered, why don't you drop us a line with a research question, and if it's something that we think there's enough evidence for us to be able to talk about, then we'll consider doing a...
So I'm sitting here very quietly letting Lynne talk about this, but of course...
What I should say, of course, is that this is Lucy's project.
But it's very much a team effort, and there are often times when it's a hard job to write these. You know, this isn't a case, as Lynne says, of summarising the research. It's about thinking about the classroom implications, which is where, you know, my background in maths teaching and the whole team's background in maths teaching is incredibly helpful, because we can really think through, so what exactly the question is. A great question. So yeah, we'd love to hear from you if you've got some ideas about future espressos. Do have a look at them and let us know what you think.
Absolutely.
Because we're in the stage now where we're continuing to get some feedback on them and make them better.
Absolutely.
So they're only really, you know, any good if they're useful to teachers. Okay, so I wanted to talk about professional associations and organisations. Because in maths, I suppose we're in a fairly unique position, I think, in that we have so many. There's such a proliferation of them. And I suppose as a maths teacher, anywhere in my career, if I was considering being a part of the work that was happening in the organisations, or going to any CPD put on by those organisations, where do I start? You know, who do I approach? How to get involved in a way that benefits me, but also potentially give something back to the maths education community. In your career, you've obviously been involved with them quite heavily in lots of different ways. So
well, I've been a member of both ATM and MA, Association of Teachers of Maths and Mathematical Association.
Shout out to both.
Yes, shout out to both, for quite a long time. And that I was very honoured to be the president of the Mathematical Association for a year, which is fantastic, and again, great honour. I think the thing that the subject associations give you, in contrast to two other sets of professional development, what's the word? Advisors, I suppose. We have those who are delivering policy. Really. So, for example, NCTM.
Also shout out.
NCTM's role is to help teachers to interpret the curriculum and to think about the policies that the government is funding and how those can be enacted. And that's a very important, you know, people in NCTM are very good and very thorough in the way in which they do those. So if you want to know about policy and policy decisions and the current way that the government is thinking, and I say current because governments think in different ways over different times, then, you know, those places are really good places to go to. Then you've got professional PD providers who usually charge quite a lot of money for their professional development, and they often have, or they usually have, very good people. They do what they think teachers are going to need, and quite often that's to do with getting students through examinations, which of course is very important for teachers to do. But reflective teachers realise that if they teach really well, their students are going to get through their exams anyway, and that actually teaching to the exams is a short-term message. Although, of course, it carries all of the emotional baggage of targets and all that. So if you look at policymaker, people working for really to the government's agenda, and then you look at private people, where do the subject associations sit? Well, the answer is really that they are independent. And so they've both been going, those two. And of course, there are things like NAMA and ARNET, which are also similar things, but for smaller sections of the population, like advisors, you know, mathematics advisors, or NANAMIC, which is for advisors and for teachers in further education colleges and that sort of thing. So there are smaller constituencies, but the main ones are MA and ATM. And the thing is that they're independent. So when governments come and go, MA and ATM are about good teaching and good learning. And so if you want to get a more objective view of good learning and good teaching, that's where you'll meet people who are of a similar mindset.
Yes.
And I would say that some of my most dear colleagues are people that I have met through the subject associations over a period of time, and I really look forward to going to the annual conferences, because that's my sort of dose of reinvigoration for the year, really, where I know, you know, they do have things about examinations, they do have things about policy, but there's also a whole load of what does the research tell us?
Yeah.
And also, let's do some maths for maths' sake. Yeah. We're all maths teachers because we really like doing maths.
Yeah.
So actually, let's remind ourselves in the hurly-burly of school life, let's go down to the workshop and make a truncated tetrahedron or whatever you want to do.
Yeah.
And just sort of enjoy the pleasure of doing some maths for maths' sake. So I think the subject associations are wonderful things. The two of them are different, but they have more in common than they have that's different. And I hope one day we'll see just one subject association. I don't think I don't think it's going to happen in the near future, but perhaps in the medium future.
Yeah, yeah. And as you say, it's not necessarily about making just one flavour. It's about making sure that everything coalesces under one umbrella, so that teachers can find everything they need.
Yes.
You know, not everybody has to think the same way about mathematics, but we're all united by love.
Yeah. And of course, they started off as the same thing, and then split into two different groups. Yeah.
So we also have some people asking us some questions, which is lovely, Lynn. So we have Arindam in India asking us about engaging maths students with English as a second language. So that's a particularly thorny one, isn't it? Yeah. Because, you know, we know that maths is a universal language, but you need to speak a particular language well in order to learn mathematics in it.
Yes.
Still, and there's, you know, a lot of vocabulary and language issues that need to be developed alongside the mathematics.
Absolutely.
So in the primary phase, how does that work?
I think it's really difficult. I mean, my O-level French, as it was, I'd hate to have to learn anything in using my O-level French. So, you know, for students and teachers who work in a second language, to teach then another subject, I take my hat off to them. Yeah, I have to say I'm not an expert on this, but I think the code switching thing, going from your own language into another language, has been shown not to be very good. So I've worked a bit in South Africa, and there, of course, there are numerous languages, and the students often speak 3 or 4 different dialects, as well as English and maybe Afrikaans as well. And there they found that it was so important to use the correct vocabulary in the new language you were working in. And if the teacher always went back to the child's native language to explain something, then the child never really, you have to explain something in the language that you're working in.
I see.
Rather than going back to your native language to explain. And that I did read a piece of research when I was there on that, and that seemed to be really, really important. Of course, maths is a universal language, but in order to talk about it, you have to use and
there's a sense, isn't there, in which we've got this nuance between languages, because the translation is never perfect.
Absolutely.
And so unless you have a word for a very particular concept, you also don't think about that concept.
Yeah, so exactly. Which is why it's important to stay in one language and not code switch between the two.
But absolutely. Hats off to teachers who are teaching in a second or third language.
Absolutely.
And then we also have some bits and bobs coming in asking about, can we map the UK national curriculum with the Cambridge curriculum?
Absolutely.
Well, I'm not sure about Cambridge curriculum, but go for it, Lynn. What do we think we're going to be able to do eventually with the Cambridge Maths framework?
So the framework has lots and lots of affordances in it. And we're certainly going to be able to map any curriculum internationally from around the world. And the point of doing that will be, we hope, to affirm that curriculum, or it may be to show where there are maybe some gaps, and be able to say what those gaps are. One of the things we know is that quite often we have things which, certainly in the UK curriculum, we have something that sort of pops up, which appears to come from, where does it come from? Angle properties of the circle. I know our colleague Rachel always uses that as an example. Circle theorem, you know. there's nothing leading up to that. So one of the things about the Cambridge Maths Framework is that we're sort of populating the train of thought behind that.
Yeah.
So that we think it's really important that students get early experiences in things, that then when they meet them formally, it actually is not a sudden jolt into something, but they get a continuum. So yes, we'll certainly be able to map the UK curriculum. We can do interesting things, like we can take a little bit of our framework and we can, a particular aspect of it, and we can map all the things that feed into it. So we can say, if you want to be successful at this bit of mathematics, here are all the things that you really need to have had experience of and to become reasonably competent and confident in before. Or we can say, if you know this piece of mathematics, this is where it can lead you to lots of different places. So this is maybe a pivotal piece of mathematics, because actually it's important for all of these sorts of streams.
Yeah, that's really exciting. Okay.
It's horrendously exciting is my phrase, because it's something that lots of people have written frameworks for mathematics, but nobody's done it quite in the way that we're doing it.
So the evidence base.
The evidence base is very important, and also the fact that we're doing this network graphing software, which allows us to connect things and really show the connections, not only in a linear way, but show connections above and beyond different parts of mathematics.
Exciting. And we also have some comments from MEI. Hello, MEI. They're saying that they think professional development resources need to promote mathematical thinking, which is what we talked about earlier. Presenting maths in an interconnected way, absolutely spot on as well. And then resources promoting mathematical learning, supporting teachers, embedding new ideas. So that's interesting, isn't it? That idea that in your professional development journey, you would gain something new to you, but then how does that get embedded, and what's that sort of long-term life of that? Because if it just pops into your lesson and then pops straight out again and that's it, you know, what's going on in your classroom, where's the continuity, and where's your actual own personal development in that journey? So I think spot on there, really.
Absolutely. And I think that, I mean, the RecMe project, which NCETM did, I don't know, it must be 5 or more years ago now.
About 8 or 9.
Yeah. Time goes by. I mean, one of the things that they showed was that actually the most effective professional development is that which has at least 2 or more occasions. So having a single occurrence of a day on professional development might be very interesting. But if you don't take something of what you've learnt on that day and put it into your classroom within the next 2 or 3 weeks, actually you won't ever. And so having paired professional development means that you have something, you think about something, you do an interim task, a gap task, trying something out, and then you've got something to talk about when you come back. And the chances of you embedding that in your practice are much greater.
That's interesting. We have another question in from Twitter. So, thoughts on a research-informed, quality-assured and centralised PD programme for teachers to sit alongside high-quality textbooks? Because we haven't talked about textbooks. Or should we let the CPD grow more fluidly? That's an interesting question.
Well, I think that links, if it's centralised. Yes, thank you, whoever you are. If it's centralised, you know, whose decision is it what goes into it?
Yes.
When we had our Cambridge Maths Symposium, what was it, about 6 weeks ago? One of our questions was, well, whose curriculum is it anyway? And if you're going to have something centralised, you're going to be pretty sure it's of the best quality it can possibly be, because if there's no other alternative, and that's the only thing you do. I mean, in some countries they do have centralised. They have, you know, only one set of textbooks and a very clear curriculum. But that's grown over a period of a very long period of years. I would not like to see centralised CPD. I think I prefer a menu to choose from.
So that comes back to teacher autonomy and trust as professionals potentially as well.
I think the other thing about centralised CPD, I mean, when we had the numeracy strategy, there was some really good PD materials that came out of that. But because the model was a cascade model, by the time it actually got down into schools, the messages, quite a lot of the messages had got quite distorted. Like, you know, teachers who had a clock on the wall where they had, you know, the 5 minutes starter and then 10 minutes on this and then 5 minutes at the end, and it was never intended to be like that. yeah.
Do you want to just explain a bit about that? Because there may be some teachers watching who were not present when the numeracy strategy was introduced, young new teachers or older new teachers.
So the numeracy strategy and the literacy strategy were nationwide initiatives which cost a huge amount of money, and I think probably did change the face of, I can't say anything for literacy, but I think did change the face of maths teaching. It was a very comprehensive curriculum, which was informed by lots of exemplars, and there was lots of really good stuff in it. And I think the aims of it were really laudable. It was all about embedding mathematical thinking, and it was really good. I think the problem was in the communication of it. That it got rather distorted. However, I still think it left a fantastic legacy, and a lot of the resources that were produced off the back of it, interactive resources, when whiteboards were fairly new, still stand the test of time. They were just good resources. They weren't time limited at all.
Thank you. Well, we've been talking quite UK centric, haven't we, especially with subject associations, and I wonder, because we are an international project and you're certainly an international mathematician of mystery, whether you wanted to say a bit more about other countries, because we're in a situation now, aren't we, where there's lots of cherry picking happening. People, as you say, try and import policies, wholesale without much regard for culture. So in terms of professional development, is there anything we can learn from other countries sensibly, I suppose, is the question.
Well, one of the fantastic things about being director of Cambridge Maths is you have a bit of a travel budget. And so I've been to several countries. I would say that of all the places I've been to, Scandinavian countries were very interesting. But despite what everybody says about Finland, there are things which are I don't think are going to be working over the long term there. But the place that has really, in my mind, got it really sorted is Japan. I loved going to Japan. We happened to be there in the autumn when the trees were looking fantastic too. So a couple of days sightseeing either end were really nice. But I mean, Tim Oakes talks about having a coherent curriculum, which also is coherent with all the other things that are going on in the country. So that the curriculum is coherent together with the assessments. So the assessments really support the curriculum and are supported by the curriculum, that they don't distort the curriculum, that the professional development for teachers is aligned with both of those, and there is enough of it in a timely fashion to allow teachers to teach that curriculum properly, rather than you've put into place the curriculum and then you think, oh, we've got a new curriculum, what professional development do we now need? In New Zealand, they did everything in a staged way. They had a new curriculum. Reception teachers were trained first of all, and then the next year they taught it. They instigated it, initiated it in the reception year. And whilst they were doing that, all the year one teachers were told about the national curriculum, and so they did it on a growing. We tend to just do it in a bit of a haphazard fashion, if you ask me. But anyway, so going back to Japan, I mean, Japan has a long history of very careful, small changes to the curriculum, which are planned. So their curriculum only changes every 10 years, with a sort of a 5-year checkup to make sure nothing's going wrong. It's heavily supported by textbooks. But then that's not surprising, because the same people who write the curriculum also help to design the textbooks, because the publishers are seen very much as partners of the whole process. Whereas I think here we tend to keep textbook designers a bit at arm's length until it's all published. But they're taken into people's confidence. The professional development teachers are seen as being very important in feeding back to the policymakers what is successful and what is unsuccessful.
Doesn't it?
So they are part of the solution. They're not part of the problem. I think quite often here teachers are seen as part of the problem.
I agree.
And in Japan they're seen as part of the solution. So you know, there's a feeding down of things to teachers, but then there's a feeding back up from what happens in the classroom. Yes, and it feeds back into the local area, and then each school publishes the little research projects that they've done through lesson study, and they publish those, and those are actually in the public domain. So it's all sort of open.
Yeah.
And they take it very seriously. I mean, the lesson study, we couldn't do lesson study in the way they do it in Japan here, because we do not have, at the moment, the really deep understanding of mathematical pedagogy.
Or enough consistently that we could, we could deepen.
And also we don't have the culture where it's okay to close the school for the afternoon, because the teachers are going to do some professional development.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Maybe one day.
Who knows? Who knows? So the whole thing about Tim saying about, you know, coherence, all these things have to align, including target setting. So if your target setting distorts the other things that are happening, in Japan they don't have that. They do have targets, but the targets are embedded in what's happening. They don't sort of cut across and cause people to play the system.
I see. So this is targets for students.
Yeah.
Okay, so talking about international comparisons then, are there any aspects of any other models in other countries that you think are very successful other than Japan?
Well, China also has a sort of a different sort of lesson study. I mean, in China the teachers are very well educated.
Do you think that's important, the level of teacher education, or the quality, or the type? What's
it's much longer, and it's recognised that you can't become an expert teacher in a 9-month part-time course,
of course,
or even 6 weeks during a summer holiday, which is what Teach First does. All of those, you know, those have their places, and obviously they fulfil a gap where we haven't got enough teachers anyway. So if you haven't got enough teachers, finding shortcut ways to get people in front of students.
Particularly in very challenging areas.
So you can understand that, but that's not teaching for the future. That's teaching for the teaching for the short term.
Unsustainable.
So I mean, in Japan, I remember going to a lesson study. A lesson study in Japan, and there's a discussion afterwards about a teacher who'd been delivering a lesson, and it was on proof. And one of the experts, because there's always a knowledgeable expert in Japan who comes in to give feedback on how the lesson went. And he said to this, the teacher was sort of apologising for something that hadn't gone quite the way that he wanted, and the expert other said, well, you know, I think you made a pretty good fist of that, considering you've only been teaching for 8 years. And I mean, here, you know, we make a bit of a joke, but it's a sad joke that actually not many new teachers stay in teaching for 8 years. I don't know what the percentage is at the moment who leave within the first 5, but it's not good. So 40%, is it? So so there is a there is an understanding that there's no shortcut to being a good teacher. You have to teach, and you have to be supportive with professional development, and you have to engage with expert others. And then you get to the point where you know the maths inside out. And you tweak things because you know what the effect of that tweak is. It's not unintended because you couldn't remember what to do. It's an intentional tweak in order to really provoke some different
That's
response.
the new hashtag I think we should get trending.
What's that?
The intentional tweak.
Intentional tweak.
So speaking of international matters, we have another person contacting us, and this time from Pakistan. Thank you very much for joining us. Asking, what's the most important thing for being a good O-level maths teacher? Now, Lynne, you have to tell me what an O-level is, because I've no idea.
Well, those of us who are going a bit grey remember O-levels. I don't think you need anything extra to be an O-level good O-level teacher than you do to be a good maths teacher. I think you teach the mathematics first, and then the qualification should follow.
Okay.
I think if you teach to a qualification, you're giving your students only a partial picture of what mathematics is really about. I mean, mathematics is, yes, of course we need to pass exams, and of course it's important that students realise that examination and their scores in examinations are important because it will give them access to the next stage in what it is. So I'm not saying exams are not important, they are important. But really, if you teach mathematics, then students will be able to do the examinations. Whereas if you do the examinations, they can't necessarily do mathematics. I think that would be my answer, which perhaps is not what you wanted me to say, but I do feel that very strongly. I think O-level and GCSE and ICSE and all the rest of them, they have aspirations to them. And I think the interesting thing about assessment is that Hugh Burkhardt talks about what you test is what you get. So you need jolly good assessments to make sure that if you're going to teach to the assessment, that's worthwhile doing. And I think that there are shortcomings with most assessments, actually. If you really want students to reason at length, to develop long chains of reasoning, if you want them to be able to connect lots of different parts of the mathematics curriculum together to solve problems, if you want to get them to be able to solve real-world problems, those are not things that are very easily done in an hour-and-a-half, 2-hour examination paper. So teachers have a professional responsibility to make sure that their students get more than they need for the examination, I think.
So do you think, I guess you were saying there that a good maths teacher is about thinking mathematically first and then, as you say, the qualification second. So do you think there are qualities or there are skills that you develop as a maths teacher across all sectors? Because I guess something interesting about the Cambridge Maths Framework is that we're looking at this 3 to 19 piece, which doesn't get done very often. So do you think there's a place there for developing maths teachers kind of that could work all the way across, or that they need to communicate with each other differently, or how do you think that could be improved in terms of professional development?
I certainly think that, you know, at the transition phases, it's always seemed to me completely ridiculous that primary teachers don't have that much of an understanding of what the students are going to go on to, and secondary teachers don't have much of an idea of what happened, unless they are, you know, unless they've sorted out for themselves. Because it's the same children, and you know, in year 6 probably they're used to going and standing up and getting up and going and fetching what resources they want, and maybe very used to talking, because we know that primary teachers are very good at getting students to work in groups and work in pairs and all that. And then they go to secondary school, and of course there's secondary teachers who do that as well, but predominantly the model of teaching in secondary school is that you sit in your desk and you don't get up, and you do have opportunities to talk to other people, but the thing that really matters is the stuff that you do on your own, where you put your arm around your work and don't show anybody else. And I just think that's a shame. So that's about classroom management and behaviours. But also, how can you really help a child in year 7, which is our first year of secondary school, with problems that they've got, if you don't know how they were taught or the experiences that they had at primary school? And how can you really support children in year 5 and 6, their last 2 years of elementary school, to be able to look forward to what's coming if you don't know what's coming? So I think that's one of the things I hope that the framework will make really easy for teachers, is to be able to follow a story of a piece of mathematics and see where it's going to, or where it came from, depending on where you are.
I love that idea of a story of a piece of mathematics.
Yeah.
That was one of my favourite things from moving from the secondary phase into the primary, that I knew where it was going. I knew all the way up to university.
Absolutely.
And so the joy of being able to sow those seeds, you know, of we're going to do algebra in a few years, but we don't have to do it now, and this is how we're thinking now.
Absolutely.
And it was a wonderful delight to be able to do that. But I had that confidence, you know, as you say, if you
knew it.
If you don't know where it's going, or you're frightened of where it's going, you know, it's a very different experience, isn't it?
Yeah.
What about early years? How does it work in early years? Do you think we support maths teachers in early years?
We don't do nearly enough.
No.
I think I think I knew this, but I don't think it was ever hit me so much between the eyes, is that if you look at the research that there is for early years and primary teaching, actually there is loads of it.
Yeah.
You know, and why is there loads of it? Because it's so difficult.
Mm.
Becoming you know, the first stages of becoming a mathematician, counting.
Yeah.
Counting is such a difficult thing
It's
to
very
do.
complex the more you look at it, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Fractions, my goodness, you know, the research that's been done on fractions.
Yeah.
And yet, if you're a secondary teacher, you probably assume that children can add and take away fractions.
Yeah.
Maybe multiply fractions by a whole number, probably
some
not,
equivalents,
maybe
yeah.
some equivalents, and all the rest of it. But if you've got a child who has problems, how on earth do you know how to support them and how to unpick what they've been doing? Yeah, whereas if you go much further up, how do you teach matrices?
Yeah, it's the same idea, isn't it?
But where is the where's the research? It's not much research on students' learning of matrices, you know, or students' learning of trigonometry. There is some, but it's not a lot. And I think that reflects the fact that, you know, if you've got students up to that certain level, it tends to be more about the subject than it does about the pedagogy. Whereas when you're working with younger children, early years children and primary children, it's more about the pedagogy than it is about the actual mathematics.
Lovely. So we've got some more questions coming in. Thank you. So one question here, this is a great question. A lot of learners are frightened of maths, essentially. And how can we reduce that? That's a really good question.
Yeah. I suppose a lot of that is down to teaching.
Yes.
And the way that it's taught. But I think in some countries in the world, the whole fear of being incorrect and it goes a bit with confidence, and also there are people who are frightened of maths, and then there are people who are quite proud that they can't do maths.
Yeah.
And sometimes those are the same people, and sometimes they're not.
Yeah.
Certainly in the UK, we've got this rather funny attitude that it's okay not to be good at maths.
So that's a cultural permissiveness.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you go on the BBC, the Today programme, and every time there's a Maths of the Day question, John Humphreys, sorry to name check you, John Humphreys.
I think we should all tweet John Humphreys.
Yes, often says, oh, I could never do algebra, or I could never do this, or I could never do that, yes, or you'll have to do this because I'm no good at this. And I think you're an intelligent, highly successful man.
Get your act together.
Of course you can do maths. we can all do maths.
Absolutely.
If we really want to.
Yeah.
Having said that, I think the anxiety thing and the fear of maths is not helped by high status tests.
No.
And but of course, primary children don't really need to know that these are high status tests.
Well, that's interesting, isn't it? So that comes from the teacher and the way that they signal that or not.
Yeah, I think so. If you know that something's really, really, really important and you're worried that you're not very good at it, then of course you're going to get frightened.
Of course. Yeah.
So, I think a lot of it is down to the way in which these things are solved.
And we know that there's a sense in which maths anxiety can be passed from teacher to student. That's interesting research there, isn't
and
it?
Parent.
And parent,
Parent to student. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I mean, I could talk to you all day. And
yeah, well,
I
can talk all day
I mean, this is partly, not my whole job, but partly my job is getting to access Lynne's expertise on all sorts of matters. And it's a wonderful privilege. But we have to wrap up, sadly. But I am usually behind our Twitter account, so that's @CambridgeMaths. We would love to hear some more from you. So if you have some questions, more comments, if there's something you'd like to ask Lynne, I will make sure it gets to her. It may not be immediately. I'll do my best to have an actual job to do. So. But thank you so much for joining us, and we really appreciate your comments, your questions, and the fact that you're joining us to think carefully about maths education and how we can better support teachers all across the world to do their jobs better, because it's so important to us, and I'm sure it's important to you. So thank you ever so much, and we hope to hear from you further.
Yes, do sign up for our newsletter.
Well remembered, thank you. If you go to our website, Cambridge Maths, and you have a look at Join Newsletter, then you can get more information about what we're doing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.